I'm very happy to welcome to the stage Tariq Khan, who is the Chief Digital and Information Officer from the London Borough of Camden, Beata Karolina Lisowska, the Chief Data Officer from Camden Council, Saba Esnaashari, Research Assistant from the Alan Turing Institute, and Lasana Harris, Professor of Social Neuroscience from University College London. So welcome all, and because there is a lot to get through in this and only 50 minutes, I know that you have previously talked together of how we're going to work this session. So this is going to be far more organised than my normal chairing, and it's all thanks to these guys, basically. Maybe you used AI to make it more efficient, I don't know. So first of all, let's start with you, Tariq. So tell us about Camden Council and why you wanted to work with AI in the first place.
Thank you. I thought I'd start off by kind of giving a bit of an explanation about what Camden Council is. Camden Council is a council that covers a part of London, everything from Covent Garden through to Holborn, through to King's Cross, up to Highgate and Hampstead. It's an area that covers around 2% of the UK GDP, and we're really lucky because we've got a number of different world-class institutions, everything from UCL to Google to Francis Crick Institute and DeepMind as well. So it's a really interesting and vibrant area. However, alongside some of these world-leading institutions, we have some of the poorest communities in Europe as well. So Camden Council is a council that is very ambitious and one that wants to tackle this level of inequality as well. So there's a real strong social value streak around it. The council itself is an organisation that helps educate people, house them, organises their public spaces, and most importantly, wraps a safety net around those that are in the most vulnerable state as well. So there's actually about 600 lines of business that the council undertakes. So for me, I came here about 2 years ago, and 3 years ago, actually it's 3 years now. God, time flies, yeah. And I've been private sector all my career. And it was a really interesting proposition to say, if you've got an organisation that really wants to tackle social value, there's all these connections, with these world-leading institutions. And most importantly, there's these 600 lines of business. There's all these incredibly rich data streams as well there. It's really interesting to be able to do something and pioneer in that space. The difference between private sector and public sector is obviously in any organisation you look at sorting out the data foundations first, data quality, governance, things like that. But in public sector you really need to focus on building public trust too as a key area within that kind of foundational piece. And so in the first instance where we've started working with Alan Turing Institute is around something called a data charter, which has started a couple of years back, which is pretty much a social contract between us and our community. And we've got a little video to kind of explain it more.
I realised that not many youth are involved in this programme, and I wanted to have my say. It was quite a fun experience. It's very important for me to actually know where my data is going.
A data charter is important because it gives us a set of ethical principles for which the council can work towards that go above and beyond existing data legislation, and that helps to guide how we use data in an ethical manner at Camden.
It breaks it down for them, it explains to them what it is, how it's stored, how it's used, what laws are there to make sure that that data is actually protected.
Camden believes that it is important to involve residents in the democratic process, and that is why we got our residents to co-create the Data Charter.
I am a resident, and it's important to have someone represent residents in these circumstances. I think the whole thing has been organised really well with the structure of the tables, the facilitator and other people getting involved.
It's not enough to just say we're going to use your data ethically, we're going to do things for your benefit. I think people really want to know what that means and have a say in actually fleshing out the principles that they think are relevant.
It's important that people get to understand that data isn't something that is used against you, because that was my theory when I came here. The outcomes of a good data collection can be very positive for the community.
A lot of my opinions have changed as well. I've started trusting Camden more with my data, because now I know that they actually do care about my data. They make sure that my privacy and my rights are respected.
In the charter, it says a lot about communicate. And so for me, it's like, yeah, but how do you communicate? Nobody's ever contacted me to communicate about this until I come here. How do we put something into the charter that says we need to raise awareness? You can make people more comfortable having those principles in place and knowing that not the boffins, but the people that live in Camden have been involved in making them.
So that's exemplary. We talked slightly abstractly in the previous session about how do you build trust when using AI and data more with government. And here you've got a very concrete example of actually getting residents involved in drawing up the charter that's going to govern how their data is used and potentially how AI is used. So can you take us on from this, Tariq? How did the charter then lead to you collaborating more with the Alan Turing Institute?
So Alan Turing Institute was very involved in the data charter setting up, but actually, funnily enough, I was at AI UK last year speaking about some of the early stuff that we were doing, and this is a point at which, as a council, we were still very much talking about building the foundations, so getting really good, talented people in, such as Beata, our Chief Data Officer, and really starting to not be as reliant on consultants, as it were, as well, and making sure that we've got people internally who understand what good looks like. And yeah, so we were talking about, I was on a panel about future of cities, and funnily enough, the one that happened, the session that happened before was a pitching session with all the different people from research, people from Alan Turing Institute pitching their ideas, and one of them was Saba, who started talking about her work around working in public sector and how AI could be implemented in that context. So it felt like a really good opportunity, and I kind of grabbed her afterwards, got very excited about it, and we've been working with her ever since.
Fantastic. So Beata, you've been naturally introduced here. Can you tell us about, both the general use of data and technology of the council, but particularly about what is it about AI that you have a vision for with Camden?
So I think when I joined Camden, you notice a trend in local authorities in which you analyse past trends and what happened in the past, but not really anticipating the future. And I think that this is where the biggest move for us is coming from, and this is where we want to invest in early help, in really understanding our population, the place where they are, as well as their surrounding. And I'm not only talking about this from systems that we've got already in place, but it's also about how you can model them, and then how you can apply artificially different pressures and check, for example, how different routes for that Camden can offer to its residents will actually have a positive impact on those residents, the way where they live as well, their homes or the green spaces as well, right? So there is a massive element of just moving us a little bit in thinking about the future a little bit more, and about being a little bit more practical about what we do with the sort of things that we have on offer. And this is why we have been fixing the foundations for the past 2 years. We've been really thinking about the quality of the data. We've really gone to the industry standards when it comes to the programs of work that we've got. And this is where we also understood that we need to partner with, trusted partners such as Alan Turing Institute, to then start building on, for example, little projects that we had before and the little prototypes we had before, such as, for example, a few years past, we've been looking at modeling a certain population characteristics and looking at, for example, can we understand people who are not in education or in training better so that we can provide some early interventions and make sure that we cover our residents. And based on that, we have actually come up with this idea of a project with Saba, where we've been making it a little bit bigger and looking at resilient families. These are the first steps in our journey in here, and I think that there are more options where we want to explore different avenues in which artificial intelligence and sometimes machine learning and sometimes other fields of AI as well can be useful. We've been also playing with geospatial. We've been part of Ordnance Survey, Earth Observation project looking at trees and the health of our trees, for example. So we're definitely heading in, we are in this exciting stage at this point in time where we are ready to engage and have that safe and ethical as well use of data.
Mm-hmm. So Saba, tell us a bit about the project that you're working on with Camden.
In fact, after I joined the Turing near 1.5 years ago, I was going to do some kind of work which uses the power of data-driven algorithms and AI to help vulnerable people and vulnerable families. And then when I searched literature, I came across the idea that if we would be able to predict before someone goes to higher statutory services, like becomes homeless, then we can help them build resilience before, in fact, they fall into trouble. And other applications of this kind of machine learning program is also if we would be able to predict the well-being of people, especially in the social care programs, after they receive social care, and then we would be able to better navigate resources to those who are really in need and to understand which resource is better for each person. For example, it happens in the homelessness that we have permanent versus temporary housing, and social workers should decide when they face a homeless person which kind of housing is more suitable for them. And by taking insight from the retrospective data that they have from those people, they would be able to predict their well-being upon allocating different resources to them. And then in that way, they can improve the well-being of individuals in a near future, like after 6 months or 1 year after they receive the resource. And we also did a literature review to understand the strengths and weaknesses of algorithms in the field, because we thought that any decision that is made based on the predictions of the algorithm is very sensitive, because it is about vulnerable people, it is about their data and their future. So we thought that evaluation plays an important role in the whole process. And we extracted a set of metrics, different evaluation metrics in the literature, and also based on the Camden Data Charter, that algorithms should be evaluated based on before any decision and any intervention based on those predictions. And among them, for example, is that aligned with Camden Data Charter, that algorithms should be transparent. It is the right of individuals that any decision that is made about them should be explainable. So making interpretable algorithms, or even if we are using, for example, more black box algorithm like neural networks, we should do additional effort to make them interpretable, to know that which features are important for predicting and identifying individuals. And another thing that we found in the literature was that algorithms could achieve around like 70 to 90% of accuracy for predicting the well-being of individuals and those who are vulnerable. And when I was thinking about was that even if you would be able to predict, let's say 6 months or 1 year before someone goes to trouble and becomes homeless, it would be great, even if we could identify them 70, let's say 70% of them. That helps a lot, just in terms of both in terms of increasing the well-being of people and helping helping them build resilience before they fall into any crisis, and also in making a better use of the resources that we have. And also what we found in the literature was that the accuracy should also be transparent, should also be persistent among different subgroups and different demographic groups. And it is very important that algorithms should be unbiased. So it is not just important that the whole accuracy, let's say, it's 90% or 80%. It's also important that it is persistent among different ethnicity, among different genders. And these are the whole things, like a bunch of things that algorithms should be evaluated based on before any intervention is made.
Yeah, I was wondering actually about how you navigate those things, because obviously it's better to help somebody before they're homeless, but at the same time, what if I'm the 10% that you're wrong about, and you've wrongly predicted that I'm in trouble and going to be homeless? Mm-hmm. Is there a danger either of a self-fulfilling prophecy, or that me being tagged as in trouble in some way could have a negative impact on my life? How do you navigate that difference between a population scale accuracy and impact on individuals?
Yeah. That's actually a very good point. The thing is that if we look at it the way it is right now, it's that we are not using any the power of data that we have. So actually, we may not be able to identify even 1% or 10% of homeless people before they go into trouble. But it evolves very gradually. So even if we could identify, let's say 20% of them, but in a fairer way that no one is excluded because of their gender or ethnicity. That's why I also discuss about bias. So it is like an improvement compared to decisions that is made by humans, right?
Right, okay. So it's
and what I would add is that at any point at which we're, our organisation is a relationship organisation, where we'll never use technology to replace human beings. It's only to enrich the decisions that they're making. So at any point at which, where the front line actually speaks to anyone, it's always a kind of something that's going to make our frontline staff make better quality decisions, but it will never kind of replace. So even with that 10%, there'll be checks and balances before it ever gets to a point where you'd actually be in contact with them.
The computer's not going to automate put into a... Yeah. I'm very sensitive to this ever since I discovered that postcode is the best predictor of crime, because I can assure you that my postcode will have me tagged on a number of pre-crime programs. So you were talking about the importance of working with partners. And Lasana, I am absolutely intrigued. What is a social neuroscientist, and what is it you're doing with Camden? I have so many questions. I'm just going to let you tell me what it is that you're doing together.
Sure. So to answer your first question, a social neuroscientist is a type of psychologist who looks at social questions or social problems using the tools of neuroscience. My work specifically looks at how people interact with AI and how we think about AI, how we perceive AI. And the work I'm doing with Camden is part of a larger project that comes out of an initiative by the Nuffield Foundation and the British Academy called the Understanding Communities Initiative. And the whole goal of this initiative is to gain deeper insight into things that affect communities. In our project, we're looking at a concept called community well-being, which is not the same as individual well-being. So for instance, you can imagine buying a vehicle might improve my individual well-being, but it adds congestion to the road, so it actually impacts community well-being more negatively. And so this project is an interdisciplinary effort to allow us to understand whether we can use data science and the tools like algorithms to gain deeper insight into how well communities are doing. And for a pilot, we're working with Camden Council. One of the reasons we're doing this is that the first part of our project looks at defining community well-being, and the collaborator working on that, Saffron Woodcraft, who's at the Institute for Global Prosperity at UCL, previously had a relationship with Camden where they worked on something called the Good Life Houston model. This was essentially a model created in collaboration with citizen scientists, right, members of Camden community, that defines community well-being within the Camden context. So it's very sort of specific to the council. And so that first work package led us to then create an algorithm based on the different parameters that we determined comprise community well-being. So these are essentially administrative data sets that are sitting in Camden servers, but also other publicly available data sources as well. And we're aggregating this information to create a tool that will allow a user, whether it's a member of Camden Council or a member of the public, to go in and get some insight into community well-being. The third aspect of that project focuses on the ethics of doing so. And so there are lots of concerns around local governments using data that hasn't necessarily been collected to provide insight, but is simply data the council collects as part of its business to then get deeper insight. And so we've convened a number of workshops trying to hash out some of these ethical issues. It's quite interesting because once you start doing it, you sort of open a can of worms and you discover a number of issues that we haven't considered, issues around data structure and data infrastructure more generally, but also issues of consent and privacy, as well as using synthetic data, which is a big part of what we're doing in our project to allow sort of greater anonymity of the data sets. And the person leading, I should say, and the data science part of it is Nansu Namoko, who's sitting right there. So all of your technical questions should go directly to him. And then finally, the last part of our project is to evaluate whether this tool is actually useful, to compare it to what we currently have to get insight into community well-being, and see whether we gain greater predictive power by bringing an algorithm to bear on the existing data sources, comparing it to the typical way we typically understand community well-being, and looking at whether it's a better predictor of economic outcomes. And so it's a really wonderfully interdisciplinary project that I think really nicely showcases how we can work with partners like Camden Council in order to use the tools of data science to get deeper insight that can improve the lives of communities more broadly.
Fantastic. There's so much here to unpack, and we will have time for questions, don't worry. But I'm going to monopolise you a little bit longer. So I'm interested to know, what kind of models have you tried out building? What kind of algorithms have you tried using? This is obviously all very much a work in progress, experimental. I'm loving this picture of you have a charter, and even that was developed with the residents, and now you're trying projects out, but you have all these different perspectives, so that even as you go, people are saying, well, but is this the right process? Is this the right data? Did it come from the right places? I mean, be honest with me, Beata, is it impossible to actually get anything done and made because there's so many people asking interesting questions at any point? Or do you actually manage to get a project working and on the road, if you like, at the same time as all this reflection and analysis?
So I think we do like two-pronged approach, which is, like I said, we do those small projects which are kind of proof of concepts, and where we utilize people who are experts in a given subject matter, a domain. So for example, that Projects in Need that I mentioned in the beginning, that's done by someone who is a lead data analyst actually in what was our directorate for supporting people. So he had this really deep understanding of all those data sets, and then we had those conversations as well with all the other service owners, right, who hold the custodianship of this sensitive data, talking about what we are doing in here. And that's when, as well, this data strategy and fixing foundation comes in, because this is where you can anonymize some of this data, you can strip some of this personal information, right, and make it a little bit safer to do proof of concepts. And once we do see a value, and for example, it always comes from user needs. So I think that there's like thousands of projects that I would like to do when it comes to Camden Council, but it's always the most interesting ones come from the service needs. So for example, but this is like not as interesting AI project as, for example, the one with Saba, but for example, We've been looking at how we can use the already existing wealth of written records data to use AI to go through it and find some trends, for example, that wouldn't be otherwise spotted by a person, right? Because this is like masses of information.
Can you give us an example of what kind of written data?
So this is, for example, social care work and stuff like that. So, or for example, if you're going out to speak to your tenant and you do your notes, right? And for example, if a contractor comes in for a repair, they might have take notes as well. Usually they are in the notes section on one of the applications, but it's actually combining them all together, stripping all the sensitive information and starting to look, for example, especially from repairs point of view, like, you know, is there a trend that we haven't spotted before?
I'm sure you know this, I'm sure this has come up to you, but I was at a housing conference talking about housing technology, and somebody told me that the single best predictor of there being a domestic violence problem in a bit of property is if the bathroom lock has been repaired twice.
Yeah.
Because it's the only room generally in a dwelling that you can lock from the inside. So, you know, we can all break a bathroom lock once, but if you go back to the same property and repair the bathroom lock again, that suggests that somebody's trying to lock themselves in and having the door broken. But you wouldn't necessarily think to centralise that information to those people.
No, but it's not an AI problem, right? It's a data management problem.
Well, yes.
And it's like, you know,
Yeah, you
and
don't
it's
need
an
AI.
infrastructure problem, right? You know, it's about bridging those silos, making sure that you have that safe way of linking, which is where master data management comes in, right? That you can put all this information together, right? So to come back to your original question, what we try to do is just take a real, like, big impact user case, which is a big naughty problem for us, and try to find different way of thinking about this, and also start to introduce this data-driven thinking. So instead of, which I think every organization, not only local authority, is quite guilty of, is sometimes looking at data as a tick box exercise. But actually, if you start to think about like all those questions when it comes to you know, where data can be actually useful, and you start having those questions like Luciana was just talking about, right? You know, you actually navigate all those complex projects completely different, and which then translates into a better service, into understanding our residents better and their environment as well.
So Saba, can you tell us some more about some of these specific projects, or maybe just pick one, and take us through a little more technically about how you went from this, oh, here's a thing we thought about doing, to here is some actual code and some results.
First, I wanted to highlight what Beata was saying about the power of the linking data set from different sources. What was very interesting for me about the project that we had with Camden was that they were linking data from different sources together, because in this way we would be able to have a more comprehensible and more comprehensive view of a person and their needs and their characteristics. Because, for example, it happens that a person refers to healthcare, but then they stop it and they become homeless. And then if we would be able to link data set from these different sources, then we can better track those people and understand their needs and the patterns of their lives. So I just wanted to highlight that. And about the project that we are doing, it is actually in the earlier stage, because the data is about vulnerable people, and there are so many ethics going around sharing the data set, both from the Turing side and from the Camden side. And we were also thinking that we should make some evaluation metrics before we are doing any predictions based on those data sets. So the collaboration is now in the earlier stages of development. And we decided to divide up the collaboration into two different phases. First would be evaluation of different algorithms based on the data set. And the second would be giving those predictions to policymakers to help them make better decisions about people. And even if the project, it's not like we need AI to improve our well-being, our communities. So we are not just, we can't say that we just want to use AI in any way. We use AI for our own benefit. So if, for example, we understand that this has so many risks, we may not proceed it. It's also something that we should discuss and we should be open about it. That what would be the risk and concerns about using those models and those predictions. So what we are doing right now is doing the literature review and trying different algorithms. There are so many different algorithms in the literature, from neural network, which is like a more black box algorithm, to like decision trees, for example, linear regressions, which are simpler methods. And also, it depends on the context, but linear programming and optimization techniques also plays an important role, because if we want to optimize, if we want to look at the community as a whole and improve their well-being, optimization techniques help us a lot for building those models.
So Lassana, I was wondering, you've been looking at this kind of area before in academia and in, I don't know, does social neuroscience count as a kind of branch of medical research? I guess to some extent. But how have your thoughts about it been changed by actually working with very hands-on, practical, on-the-ground projects?
I think one of the things that's really interesting is the perception we have of AI, the public has of AI, changes as quickly as the technology changes and as quickly as the scandals sort of erupt, which shifts sort of opinions. And so getting the public input, I think, is really crucial for understanding how the public will view the tools that we're building. The tool that we've built as part of our project is inherently very flexible and very transparent. We allow users to go in and adjust, for instance, the weighting of the different kinds of data that are contributing to the aggregate, so that the public isn't being handed sort of some top-down instructions about what community well-being is, right? They have the ability to play with it and to move it around. And so giving the public that flexibility, giving our partners that flexibility, we think is vital, because the way we view AI and data science today is probably going to shift within 5 years as new technology comes out and the way we interact with it comes out. So that means anything we build today can be obsolete in 5 years, and that's not what we're trying to do. The other interesting aspect of it is we have a sort of plug and play feature to it, where we think any local council can sort of prepare their data sets in a particular way and just feed them into the algorithm to be able to gain this insight. So having that degree of user flexibility, we think, is also going to be crucial to allow us to navigate the shifting winds, as it were, as AI continues to develop and evolve. So I don't think any of us here can predict what will happen in 5 years in terms of AI, the technology, and the way that we're using it. But if we create tools and frameworks that are inherently flexible and are able to adapt to these shifts, then the kinds of shifts that we've been documenting, for instance, in my lab over the last 10 years, won't necessarily lead to obsolete technology or to use cases that are no longer relevant.
It's fascinating. So Tariq, I wanted to ask you, I mean, obviously, with all this active projects and research going on at the moment, presumably the data charter itself and the way you use it is evolving. But I'm also starting to wonder whether you're in fact having to spend a lot of your time going out talking to other local authorities and other projects about how they might learn from what you're doing and implement a much more involving, a much more interactive way of working with your citizens using technology.
Yes, so we've had a lot of interest in the work we've been doing with the charter. We've had the Commission for Human Rights, Equality and Human Rights, who've taken a lot of our work as case study and integrated it into their guidelines. We've been actively involved with the London Office of Technology and Innovation and kind of leading the charge there. But you know, you're right. This is, and to Lassana's point, this is slow, patient work. I was saying that I used to work in private sector, right? A lot of the times there, with technology, it was about being first rather than best, but you have a much stronger responsibility here, right? So it's about making sure that those foundations are right, and it's not about just making sure the foundations are right for Camden, but actually with this sort of stuff, we have a responsibility to the rest of our community, and neighbours, like in the other London boroughs, to make sure that everyone's kind of raising their game. Because if you take a citizen-centred approach, no one really cares what borough they're in, right? Yeah. They just walk through, and it's London, right? There's this antiquated thing of breaking it up into all these different boroughs. So yeah, a lot of our work has been around making sure that we're evolving the data charter as well. So what you saw there was kind of the version 1. Beata can talk to you a little bit about like some of the bits and pieces that we've been doing, because actually we've listened, and there is now a slightly different approach that we're taking, and slightly more granular. But yeah, it's just that deliberative democracy approach that we need to kind of embed across the landscape.
So you've gone from let's move fast and break things to let's move slow and mend things.
Yeah. That's very good. Yeah.
You can use that.
Thanks.
Beata, tell us more about how the Charter is evolving.
So those 2 panels that happened, there was a gap of 2 years between them. So after the last one, and especially it really made me think, and I always keep on coming back to that video. I love it when Amanda says that this is like, something that is usually thought of as reserved for the boffins, right? And I think it resonated. So what we have done is we have created Camden Talks Data, which is a series of events that happen every 3 months, but we're going to be spreading it a little bit more, I think, which takes certain topics about where we are using citizens' data, and then we are producing an animation explaining a very complex method. So, for example, we've been talking about sentiment analysis before, because we've been using that as well for understanding the feedback from our tenants. So it's kind of those events are all about service perspective, but with a focus on data. Our latest one, which happened just 2 weeks ago, was about geospatial, and we were talking about, like, to Tariq's point about, like, it makes no difference for a citizen if they are within London Borough or they just crossed over to Islington. We have just started a Pan-London cross-working group on improving our geospatial standards, and as well pretty much standardization of our data sets and how we are actually making sure that all our data sets can be pinned to a location, so that we can, for example, track better homelessness across our boroughs and things like that. So so as our maturity as well grows, our aim is to, again, ditch the Camden Talks data, right? And instead have actually, whenever we go out to residents and we talk from the service perspective, we talk about repairs, we talk about green spaces, we're actually talking about data at the same point. And to be honest, this is my aspiration when it comes to our maturity as Camden, and we're really going that direction and hitting all the milestones along the way. Which is that, like, if someone knocks on your door, for example, and talks to you about social care, they're quite confident about talking as well how that data, for example, can be used to inform other projects around Camden, or, for example, asking them actively for participation in certain things. What's nice about this, and I'm going to stop talking in a second, but what's nice about DDS, so this is the director that Tariq's got, is that he's got data, technology, and digital product, right? Which means that we all work together. Which means that, like, as we are making data more interoperable, as that interoperability is safe, as we anonymize data, that means that the offering, for example, when it comes to digital space, we've got to our citizens is better, right? So, for example, we can ask for consent through apps, right? And this is really where that democracy and that consent and that participation with the residents goes to a completely different level. So that's our aspiration, and many steps along the way to get there.
So, Lassana, I'm interested, do you have a lot of input into this kind of granular process of how to actually get people in the course of their very normal interactions with the council also involved in this, if you like, overarching conversation about technology?
Yeah, I think that's an interesting question. For us, the technology is really just executing a particular framework. And so really getting people involved in developing that framework is key, because the technology is just sort of echoing the framework. So there's a lot of concern about getting people involved in understanding the technology. We think that's important, but we think what's also important is that people have input into essentially the model parameters, if you will, so that the technology isn't this thing that's on high, where people can't sort of have any input into how it's developed and ultimately how it's going to be used. So we've put a lot of effort into making sure that we have community voice in terms of defining the parameters that we're using to constrain the model. And I think that's the right kind of approach for getting the community involved. There's a lot of worry around explainable AI, for instance, and transparency. But one of the reasons I think the public would like AI is because it can do things that they can't do. What the public, I think, at least from our data and our research, seems to be really invested in is the purpose of the AI. So what is the AI being used for? And that's where I think you need to have a lot of interaction with the council. So if we're using the AI, for instance, in the case of Saba's project, to predict whether I get an uplift in my housing benefit because it will keep me out of homelessness, I want to have some input into that kind of use case, right? I want to be able to know what are the parameters that you use to determine that I am the one who needs the uplift, not my neighbor. And secondly, is this AI output going to be seen as sort of something that's hard and fast that I can't change, or will I still have some input? Will I be able to say, for instance, that I just live in this postcode that has high crime rates, right? I'm not necessarily one of the criminals. And so a lot of the concerns around AI is the automaticity of it, the fact that people view it as objective. And when an AI spits something out, we're then confined to obey that particular decision. So conversations around that we've discovered are very useful in these cases.
And yeah, it brings back to Tariq's earlier point about making sure there's always a human being involved in the actual interaction. It doesn't become completely automated. We've had one question in from the Slido, even though I kind of hinted that I would be monopolising the panel, but I feel I should throw this out. Often, Rick asked this, thank you, Rick. Often public services are provided by charities. Have they been involved in the work at Camden? And if so, how are they benefiting? And if anyone would like to.
Okay, so we've got a very vivid VCS sector, and we work very closely with our charities.
That's voluntary and community service.
I know, but also with different charities. But let me start with the VCSs.
No, I was just saying, explain what VCS means.
Oh, sorry.
Because people won't know what VCS means.
Sorry. 2 years, too long. So, and what we are trying to do is quite often what they are doing is not being tracked, that data is not being captured, and before as well there has been this disconnect between the council and what they are doing. So we are working actually with them in, again, depending on a sector, depending on the organization, they have different data maturity, right? So we can start with standards of trying to get that data as well and working with them on using more of that data to have that more comprehensive view to for our methods and predictions. But equally, there is something for us, as we do work with them on their projects as well before they even start, and get that view as well, comprehensive view of the needs. So that's more of a needs view. But definitely when it comes to that, getting that data back and building that data picture, that's something we're working towards.
Yeah, I think our work with the voluntary and community sector, we've got really strong relationships with them. And one of the principles within Camden is we aren't domain experts on everything, right? There's subject matter expertise out there, people that are on the ground that know what they're talking about. So when we're talking about a lot of this technology and data and how we implement AI, it's very much done bearing in mind that, you know, we start with the unmet need, and technology and data is the enabler that we may use in order to sort that. Fantastic.
I just want to have a quick survey and see, is there anyone in the room that would like to ask a question? Yeah. Oh no, I should have come out much sooner. Okay, so please bring microphones. There's somebody right over there at the end of that row. Have we got more than one microphone? There. Second row, thank you. Third row, thank you. And then if we can get another microphone here to the middle. Is there another microphone? No. Okay.
Thanks. Hi, I'm Georgina Cosma from Loughborough University. I've recently completed a project with the Leicestershire County Council on exploring the potential of machine learning in identifying children or young people who may need early help. So after spending many months preparing the data with social care experts at the council, making decisions, justifying them, documenting every decision about every variable we had in the data set, then we applied machine learning with bias management and mitigation, and we explored many models. The models performed very well on identifying true positive cases, and also returned a lot of potentially false positives. This is because the model was trained on data that did not have missed opportunities, as in, which were cases that we were sure that, they needed early help. So we are now at the stage of exploring all those potentially false positives to identify whether there are any missed opportunities in there. So I just wanted to know kind of your experience in this kind of missed opportunities and using supervised models. And perhaps, the way forward might be to actually explore unsupervised models as well, just to eliminate any issues with this kind of situation that I explained, yeah.
So in order to make the best use of the 3 minutes we have left, I'd like to take the other points from the floor, and then maybe between you could try and cover answering all of them as we wrap up. So where were the other hands in the middle? Okay, so is this on the second row, and then also further back?
The bias. Beata, you said you collect the information sometimes from social care, and it's provided by humans, and we are all biased. So the information is already biased. How do you deal with that, and also underrepresented the communities that don't go to social services?
Okay, excellent and pithy, thank you. And where was that hand further back? All I can see is a grey sleeve going up. There you go.
Hi, it's your friendly neighbours, Westminster City Council. So obviously, as central London boroughs, we don't just cater for residents. We've got a huge worker, visitor, international tourist population, and we hold data on those people as well. If you think about high street dynamics, footfall, spend. So how do you build those groups into your data charter?
Okay, excellent, all excellent questions. So, basically, can I ask you all an impossible task? Between you, I'd like you to answer all those excellent points and questions, and also leave us with one tip that other people trying to work in similar projects, local authorities, but also other people, could take away from this session, because the amount of experience and expertise on this panel is absolutely stunning. So shall I start from that end and work this way?
Sure.
That's all right. So between you, if you can answer those questions, that'd be great, but also give us one takeaway that people can learn from all your experience.
Sure. I think the 3 questions hit on 3 problems that we identified in our project as well, the sort of transient resident and how do we account for them. Camden has the same concern. The issue of bias and missing data in particular, people that aren't in the data sets aren't being represented, and also the issue of whether the model be supervised or unsupervised because of this issue of false positives. I don't think we've solved all three of those issues. I think we've found solutions that we're testing out to see if they're useful. We've relied on synthetic data a lot to simulate missing data in cases where we think it might be unavailable. We've assumed that transient residents are sort of involved but not involved in some data cases versus others, and then simulated the data when missing. And we're trying both types of models to see if we get sort of better performance and prediction. In terms of a takeaway, I think the takeaway is to keep doing what we're doing, but also to keep the sort of ethical concerns front in mind. A big part of how we're doing our project is the ethics is going along with the actual building of the algorithm. So as these problems pop up around bias or missing data, we take it to our ethical groups and try to find solutions and guidelines that then feed back into how we're developing the algorithm. So keep doing what you're doing with the ethical principles sort of next to it, would be my advice.
Thank you. Saba?
Yep. About the questions first, about the question on false positive and true positive rates, I think that's an important issue, and it's kind of a trade-off. If we keep like false negative rates to near zero, then what happens is that we would be spending more resources than needed, for example, to providing more social care for those people that may not really need that. I think it needs more investigation, and it also needs a good communication between those experts who are implementing and designing algorithms and the community and the residents whose algorithms are about, to make a balance between these two. And also it's important to bring uncertainty into our models. There are, for example, a lot of models that they don't predict, they assign a level of uncertainty to predictions, and we can also use uncertainties to better handle that problem. And about the bias problem, I think that that's something that is also very important, and it is something that is a very general discussion about how AI can learn bias that's from people preferences. And I think I don't have any clear answer for that. It's something that is like under discussion even in the research area. But I think that having a more transparent discussion, bringing different opinions and hearing different voices inside the society would help it a lot. And also I think that my takeaway is that I think it's important for the research community and for the like people to communicate with each other. It's good that this work that we are doing with Camden is very valuable for me, because on one hand we are in a research team in Alan Turing Institute, but on the other hand, when we are collaborating with Camden are in direct contact with the residents, and they can know their opinion because the decisions and the data is about those people, and it's very important that we are engaging those people in the process of decision making.
Thank you very much. Perfect.
Right, so just very quickly, I don't want to be honest, I think Losana and Saba have made great points. I think there is collaboration, and I actually would love to pick up a conversation with you after this to talk about this when it comes to bias. This is where like the monitoring, like true monitoring actually comes into play, and see how big and the scale of a problem is and where we can do something about this. And this is where the collaboration with academia as well as private sector comes in as well to come up with some solutions. But I don't think we have all the solutions to that, but it's something we should always have at the forefront of our information. To our colleague from Westminster, I think that there is definitely data gaps, and there is definitely something that, again, I would love to pick this up conversation as to how we can address some of those gaps. When it comes to some of the groups being not represented with the Camden Data Charter, our selection, like if you go to Camden Data Charter, you will see how we have done the panel selection, which is quite robust, but again, happy to pick it up. My one takeaway is do not underestimate the importance of doing data, not technology, right, to unlock the potential of all the different methods that we have. And and that also includes then investing in professions such as data architects and looking at all of this from the data perspective and being data-driven rather than solution-driven.
Thank you very much.
So my quick tip would be make sure you find your why. Why are you doing this? What is the thing that's driving you? Why are you here? Because if that's the reason myself and Beata came to this organisation is because what we really wanted to do was deliver social value and tackle inequality. And that's one of the things that gives you the motivation and resilience to do the slow, patient work that we're talking about. So you saw in the first two questions, these are obstacles, and of course there's many different things to overcome. But if you've got a clear kind of drive and kind of fire in the engine that says that you do genuinely want to make this world a better place and support the people that are less fortunate than yourself, then that's how you kind of keep the fuel in the tank to get over some of these things. And that's why, when we're talking about the data charter, our first, where we always go to, is the most vulnerable people in our community, and make sure that we're looking at them first, and then we're thinking about the other people kind of, secondary to that, because the need is greater. So.
Please thank the fantastic panel for a really fascinating talk.